What's good, everyone? My name is Jacob Moses, and welcome to another episode of the Not Boring Tech Writer, where in each episode, we focus on a different skill that you can learn to enhance your skill set, improve your marketability, diversify your career, and ultimately break the stereotype that technical writing is a boring career. This episode's skill: nudging users to action through contextual help. As technical writers, we help users learn a process or complete a particular task. And we offer this help in several ways, including documentation, video tutorials, or learning management systems. But get this, through gentle nudges and clues throughout the user's journey, technical writers can help users achieve their goal without having to refer to the help resources. How, you ask? Through contextual help, the microcopy, in-app guides, and info tips that developers and user experience designers include in their product to guide users throughout their journeys. You've seen examples of contextual help. Think about the copy that appears below freeform fields instructing you which content to enter, or arrows guiding you through a new interface. This is contextual help, and you, the technical writer, are best equipped to create it for your company. That's why in this episode we have Casey Ewing on the podcast, fellow alum of the University of North Texas and tech writer out of Austin, Texas, though soon moving to Brooklyn, New York, to begin a new tech writing gig with Bloomberg. Casey has created several forms of help resources, including contextual help for her employer, and in this episode, shares the skills you need to excel in creating contextual help for your own employer, including how to position yourself in the user experience process, how to practice your contextual help writing, and where to find the best examples of contextual help. Big shout out to Knowledge Owl, a wonderful knowledge-based software product, for sponsoring the Not Boring Tech Writer, and I hope you all enjoy this episode. Hey there, Casey. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How's life in Austin?
It's pretty good. It's very hot, but yeah, not too bad.
Yeah, as you know, I'm just right down the road from you in Denton, and thankfully a little cooler these days. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, yeah,
And now you were on the move, correct? You got a new gig going down in New York. Can you tell listeners a little bit about that?
that's true. Sure. Yes, I've just accepted a new position at Bloomberg, where I'll be writing help content for the Bloomberg Terminal, which is it's a software that provides like financial market data and analytics to market participants like stock traders. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Casey, that's so cool.
yeah.
Well, Casey, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. We have a great skill to discuss together, and that is nudging users to action through contextual help. So I imagine talking a little bit about UI documentation, microcopy.
Mhm.
Really excited to have this conversation. Before we dig in, I would love listeners to get to know you a little bit better and your experience as a tech writer. I know you said you're about to head off to New York, do some great work over at Bloomberg.
Mhm.
Could you give listeners an idea of the kind of work you've been doing before then, up to this point?
Sure. And I'll give you a little background too. So I kind of
Please,
came
that sounds good.
to, yeah, I kind of came to technical writing through a little bit of a non-traditional route. I was a pastry chef for many years.
Wow.
And so when I was doing that work, I actually really discovered that I got the opportunity to do some recipe writing and really discovered that I loved doing that. And so that's very similar to technical writing. I mean, I would even say that it is technical writing because
Yeah.
you're documenting a process, you're using steps and you kind of have to think about the user in their home and what tools they would have or not have that you
Yeah.
might in your commercial kitchen. So that's kind of how um, I decided I wanted to try technical writing because I liked that a lot. So then I
What was
went,
your go-to pastry whenever you're
ooh,
working as a pastry chef?
that's a good question. I really like to make pies. So one of like my
Nice.
favorite pies that I ever made was like an apple pie with like salted caramel and like a
Ooh,
rose whipped cream. So
I love it.
yeah. um, but yeah, since then, since I got out of the pastry world, I've been doing just all kinds of technical writing, mostly in the software space. So doing online help articles, release notes, some API documentation, and then also more recently doing more UI content and contextual help, such as info tips, error messages, notifications, things like
Very cool.
that. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit more about this skill of contextual help. For listeners who may be new to tech writing, perhaps they're have spent most of the time doing more traditional tech writing, whether that's manual software documentation, and maybe aren't familiar with contextual help such as UI copy. How would you explain it to folk?
Sure. So I feel like it's a little bit of an emerging area of technical communication. So I've heard it described many ways. Some people call it microcopy.
Yeah.
I've heard contextual help. Madcap Flair calls it context sensitive help.
Hmm.
So, but this is just things that are integrated into an application, like an info tip where a user hovers over an element and an overlay displays with some text about how to use or interact with that element. Also, things like guided tutorials when you log into an app for the first time or use a feature for the first time, and it walks you through how to use it. And so things like this, like the info tips, can often be like single sourced from more
Cool.
in-depth help articles. And then, but really, any text within an application, I would say, is fair game for tech writers. So, yeah.
And I'm curious, Casey, who usually writes this kind of microcopy or whichever term they use? I think about my very first employer, Rainmaker Digital. This was reserved, so it of course went through development. Developers were knocking out the UI, and then we had our marketing folk write the UI copy. In your experience, who's usually in charge of writing this copy?
Mm-hmm. So I see it's kind of all over the map. From what I've seen, I've often seen marketing writers write it also, but sometimes I've seen developers or UX designers
Yeah,
creating this content as well. I think it kind of depends on the company and what kind of staff they have and
yeah,
things like that. But yeah, I think some types of contextual help are or UI content are often fall to the tech writer, such as error messages and info
yes,
tips. But I think really um, being that we're already kind of in that space, like helping with those kind of things, I think really like all of the UI content is something that tech writers can provide a lot of value.
oh yes, absolutely. And I know the skill we're focusing on is nudging users to action through this
Mhm.
contextual help. I can imagine the tech writer, if it's his or her job to knock out this contextual help, you know, they best understand these different kinds of features, how the users are actually using them. I can imagine the tech writer really being able to take over this kind of role and maybe even help the user from having to, have to dig into the software documentation and try to find the exact thing that they're looking for. Have you found that this contextual help can kind of you know, help the user not have to dig into documentation and be able to stay on the screen that they're working on to knock out what they want to achieve?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the hope. I think as users, are more. I guess I feel like as a culture, as a society, our attention spans are waning. So
Sure.
I think any way that you can kind of just like help them, like you said, give like the nudges that they need right there in the
Yeah.
application. And I think too, like if you're advocating for yourself as a tech writer, which we often have to do, right? I
Mhm.
think product people tend to see the value in that when it's right there and easily accessible too. So
Yeah.
that's nice.
In your experience, Casey, doing some of this microcopy, at what point did you find yourself a part of the conversation about how the UI is to be displayed? I think about my past experiences as a tech writer. I didn't see the eventual UI for a new release until like maybe a handful of days before it was supposed to come out. And then I have
Mm-hmm.
to update all the screenshots and rewrite any documentation in case the UI changed. If a tech writer is listening to this and he or she sees themselves as someone who can achieve in doing some of this microcopy, or maybe it's a void at the time and they want to step up and fill it, how do you think they best present themselves as someone who wants to take a shot at this microcopy and kind of fit themselves in this conversation early on as development is working out any new releases?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me there was kind of in my previous company kind of a void there. So what really helped me, I think, was building a strong relationship with UX design team
Cool.
because they had taken an interest in kind of making some standards around voice and tone and things like that for the text in the application. And so they had reached out to our team just kind of, wanting some advice about that voice and tone. But
Yeah.
I think basically, yeah, building relationships with, whoever at your company is doing that kind of work or might be interested in that kind of work. I think sometimes I've seen, developers too who are, in charge of the text for their parts. So just, I guess making yourself known that you're available and just kind of
Yeah.
trying to slowly build that relationship was how it worked for me. So,
So I'm curious to hear from you, Casey.
mhm.
What do you think makes an exceptional bit of microcopy? Because I
Mm,
know, like listeners, this is like a handful of words, like
mhm.
maybe a dozen words at tops. So you really have to be fantastic at writing short, brief, strong copy. In your experience, and I know this of course differs based on the feature, but is there a general theme that you see in really exceptional contextual help copy?
Mhm. So I think there tends to be this idea that like those who create and design products are meant to delight the user and technical writers are just meant to like instruct on how to use them.
Hmm.
But I think really great like technical writing can really do a lot to delight the user. Like one example I think is really great is TurboTax. I don't know if anyone has
Oh
used that
yes,
recently, but
yes.
they have really integrated contextual help. So if you're on a screen and you don't know how to proceed, they'll usually have some text that provides a link you can click on, and it'll open a right hand pane that will provide more, it's more like a traditional help article, but still somewhat short.
Yeah,
So I think one thing though, going back to kind of the writing, it's like a little bit of a different writing muscle to flex, I
sure.
think, doing that UI content. So I think one thing that has been helpful to me is being okay with taking on a little bit more of this conversational, maybe a slightly marketing-y tone at times.
Cool.
So one book that I found really useful is called Microcopy, the Complete Guide. Um,
What was
and
the latter part? Microcopy what guide? I'll make a note
the
of that.
complete, yeah,
The
Microcopy, the
complete
Complete
guide.
Guide.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it just provides kind of useful advice on all the different kinds of microcopy that you might want to create and things like that. So,
Interesting. And listeners, I'll make sure to include a link to this book titled Microcopy the Complete Guide in the show notes so all of you can check it out. I would include a link to a place to see TurboTax's microcopy,
mhm.
but I think I've already knocked out my taxes for the year, or at least hopefully I have. Um, but that's a great point. I know anytime I get stumped there doing my taxes, it feels so natural just to move on to the next step despite not having really any serious knowledge about
Yeah,
how the process works.
yeah, I think and that's one of those things too where it's a thing that everyone hates, right? Doing their taxes and the help, the great context help in this case makes it really like less painful. And so I
Yeah,
think it does a lot to increase like brand loyalty and just really the brand experience.
I can totally see that.
You know.
Tell me more a little bit about this book, Casey, and the different types of examples of microcopy that you discovered. Because I know myself, admittedly, like really all I think about is just, maybe a little field where you're supposed to enter particular information, and then maybe just some microcopy that reminds you, hey, this is where you put your first name, or this is where you explain this particular thing that you want. But I imagine this complete guide really digs into a lot of other microcopy that listeners maybe aren't even familiar with. Looking back at that book, were there any examples that surprised you?
That's a good question. So um, I think mainly it's just that, like, I found when I've been working on some of the microcopy things that I haven't usually been asked about, but I always, notice when I'm looking at applications, the text. So is things just like the descriptions of a field or
Yeah,
notifications that the user will get, like if they um, do something incorrectly and the notification pops up to let them know what they did.
cool.
Menu copy as well was one thing that I hadn't thought a lot about, like the naming of menu options. We don't typically get asked that, but I think technical
Yeah,
writers would be like great to help out with those kind of things, since we think about those things usually in terms of our own help if we're creating online helps or things like that. So
absolutely. And listeners, if the conversation of user experience design is new to you, we have a really excellent episode back in the archives. Episode, I think it's 4, with the lady named Autumn Hood, who happens to be another UNT alumni like Casey and I, discussing just how best to understand user experience design. So if you're curious, really good episode to look back on, to complement this great message that Casey's sharing. Thinking more about contextual help and the different examples that you gave, Casey, kind of jogged my memory. At Rainmaker Digital, we use this really cool software called WalkMe. So it was the coolest thing. So you'd actually create these like on-screen steps that users could take to achieve whatever they wanted to do throughout the platform. So, for example, our main product was the Rainmaker platform. It was a complete content marketing system built on the WordPress framework. And say, you go to the help documentation, you type in, I want to create a podcast episode. So you could create something that would start a walk me, and it would point to, hey, click contents. You click it, and then the next little on-screen tip would come up that says, click new podcast episode with an arrow. Click that, and our users ended up really enjoying it. I'm not sure how accessible of a product it is for small tech writing teams, but for us, it was a really great product that people really resonated with.
yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, I've seen a lot of great help content in that same kind of system. I think at my previous company, we were starting to use a software called Pendo, where you can it does analytics kind of like Google Analytics, but you can also do like in-app guides and tutorials with it. So it sounds kind of similar, and yeah, definitely, I think our customers were really liking that.
Yeah, that's awesome, Casey.
Mhm.
And you mentioned before how, the tech writer truly is one of the best fits to fill this role with his or her employer. And I totally agree, because this is a form of help documentation, and I think maybe the tech writer may think, like, no, like I can just send people to the documentation, they can learn how to knock stuff out there. But what a great way to like give little nudges, little hints about what they hope to achieve through a particular product, through microcopy. I can really imagine this working out well. And I bet it'd be fun to, kind of test out your marketing language, and to get a little fun with it. I know I always think about Slack, their release notes. They do an excellent job of, incorporating, of course, the technical side of whatever is included in the new release. But they introduce humor. There's really fun cadence and rhythm to their release notes. So I imagine it'd be a really good fit for the tech writer who, of course, knows the technical side of the product, thus can create really helpful microcopy. But also, let's test out a little bit of my own interests as a writer. It seems like a really nice marriage between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it really, really fun to write. And yeah, it's because you do know the technical side, so you can kind of provide both of that conversational tone, but also, you already have your minimalist writing practices that you're used to. So that helps with, the small amount of real estate that you get to deliver that content as well. So
Yes.
yeah, I think tech
I
writers,
love that, Casey.
yeah,
Do
great.
any other necessary skills come to mind that the tech writer should consider working on to really excel at microcopy? We know that everyone listening to this is already a fantastic writer. If they're working in software, they really understand their product. But of course, it's different to be going from writing instructional manuals or different kinds of software documentation to writing these really effective one liners. do any other skills come to mind that you recommend a tech writer acquire to really excel at this?
So I think for me, it's mostly just that um, that voice and tone piece,
Yeah.
and having. So I think one thing that's helped me too is just by reading any of the marketing writing or just other text
Oh, good
within.
idea.
Yeah, just other text within the application to get a sense of that tone and try to mimic it. And I also just find that like oftentimes if I have a question about how, marketing might refer to something, just kind of relying on those relationships that I have with the marketing writers, say, okay, how would you refer to this? And
Yeah.
just workshopping things a little bit with them.
Have you found, Casey, that marketers call a particular feature a different name than the tech writers? Have
Yeah,
you ever had that
definitely
issue?
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely sometimes I feel like we talk around each other a little till we figure out where it's coming from. But
Uh-huh.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that we ran into that at Rainmaker Digital too, because the marketers did an excellent job with the UI copy, but it turns out that we were calling something completely different in the documentation, which of
Hmm.
course we don't want. So that's not very helpful for the user.
Right.
But if
That's
we can,
another reason why tech writers would be good to stay.
true,
They already know.
very true, Casey,
Mhm.
very true. Well, Casey, this has been an absolute joy. I appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. I know we're all rooting for you as you move up to New York and start this new gig with Bloomberg. Do you know which borough you're moving into yet? Do you know your neighborhood?
Well, so I'm not totally new to New York. I did live there when I was a pastry chef, so I always
Very
lived
good.
in Brooklyn. So I'm thinking about
Nice.
Brooklyn again. Yeah.
Nice.
Mhm.
Well, make sure to get connected with the Write the Docs folk up there. I think they have a pretty popular chapter in New York that does a lot of excellent work. Good crew to connect with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Well, Casey, thank you again. This has been so much fun. If anyone wants to connect with you, learn more about all the great work you're doing, where can people connect with you online?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and then I'm on Twitter at Bright Right Light.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, listeners, in the show notes below this player, we will include a link to the book Casey mentioned, Microcopy the Complete Guide. I'll link to Walk Me, just the on screen help tool I mentioned. We'll link to Pendo, and then also Casey's LinkedIn and Twitter, so you all can get connected. Casey, thank you. This has been fun. I hope you have a lovely day, and we will chat very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Casey. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again to Knowledge Owl, creators of the wonderful knowledge-based software, for sponsoring the Not Boring Tech Writer podcast. And thanks so much to each of you for listening to this episode. Talk soon.